The silent epidemic, how unresolved early trauma shapes tragic lifelong outcomes. Have you ever known someone who seemed fine but was silently struggling? Someone who suddenly did something shocking and no one could understand why? Trauma isn't always visible, but its effects are profound and far-reaching. 1. Early trauma, a life-or-death experience for a child. To a child, trauma feels like a life-or-death situation. Children have hypersensitive senses, and their developing brains don't yet have the tools to process overwhelming emotions. Neglect, abandonment, or abuse leave an indelible mark. Scientists have found that trauma rewires the brain. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes hyperactive. It triggers constant vigilance, making the world feel unsafe. The hippocampus, which processes memories, shrinks, leaving traumatic events stuck in the mind as vivid, intrusive experiences. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning and impulse control, shuts down under stress, making it hard to regulate emotions. Trauma survivors often live on the edge, ready to fight, flee, or freeze at the smallest trigger. Number 2. How trauma shows up later in life. Repetition compulsion. When trauma goes unresolved, it doesn't disappear, it repeats itself. Sigmund Freud called this repetition compulsion. Trauma survivors unconsciously recreate painful experiences in adulthood to regain control over what once felt uncontrollable. This can look like sabotaging relationships, lashing out, or even inflicting trauma on others, a tragic attempt to process their own suffering. Have you noticed patterns in your own life? Relationships that seem to repeat the same pain? These patterns are not random. They're echoes of trauma calling out for healing. Number 3. Trauma's role in mass shootings and suicides, acknowledging complexity. Now, some of you might ask, are trauma and abandonment really to blame for tragedies like mass shootings or suicides? Aren't other factors, like social isolation, mental illness, or access to weapons, more significant? And you'd be right. There's no single cause for these devastating events. Mental illness, societal failures, and environmental stressors all play a role. But here's what the data shows. 42% of mass shooters experience childhood trauma, abuse, neglect, or loss. Nearly 72% were suicidal before committing their acts of violence. Bullying, especially in those with pre-existing trauma, significantly exacerbates emotional pain and fuels escalation. Trauma creates a vulnerability, an emotional wound, that when combined with bullying or social isolation can lead to catastrophic outcomes. Addressing trauma isn't the only solution, but it's a critical piece of the puzzle. 4. Bullying as a trigger for catastrophe. Bullying and trauma are a dangerous combination. For survivors of early trauma, bullying feels like a reopening of old wounds, pushing their nervous system into overload. Studies show that 40% of bullied children display PTSD symptoms. Victims of bullying are more likely to develop depression, anxiety, and suicidal tendencies. When early trauma meets bullying, the pain can escalate rapidly, sometimes leading to tragic events in schools and workplaces. Do you know someone who's being bullied? Maybe it seems small to you, but for someone already carrying trauma, it can feel like the end of the world. Number 5. Silent trauma, hidden in plain sight. The most dangerous trauma is often the most silent. Survivors of abandonment or neglect may suppress their pain, hiding it so well that even their families fail to notice. This is why families of mass shooters or suicide victims often say, "We had no idea." But trauma leaves signs: withdrawal, perfectionism, explosive anger, or emotional numbness. Neuroscientists have found that suppressed trauma continues to influence behavior through the brain's stress response system. Over time, the nervous system becomes dysregulated, leading to either emotional numbness or intense overreactions to small triggers. 6. How do we stop the cycle of trauma? The good news is, trauma can be healed, but it requires early recognition, compassion, and support. Safe relationships are key. Trauma survivors need environments where they feel seen, heard, and understood. Schools and workplaces must adopt trauma-informed practices to identify and help those at risk. Therapy, especially trauma-focused approach, can help survivors process their pain and break free from destructive patterns. So how can we help? Start by listening. Check in with those around you. You never know who might be silently struggling with wounds from the past. 7. Conclusion. A call to action. Trauma may begin in childhood, but it doesn't have to define adulthood. By recognizing its signs, offering support, and creating safe spaces, we can prevent trauma from repeating itself. Your kindness, your understanding could be the lifeline someone needs.